Welcome back to another episode of Doing It for Retention. This is the Christmas special, the last one actually for 2025, which is pretty crazy. So I had to bring on two great guests. I've got Dave Jackson and Peter Lyon. I said Lions when I put the LinkedIn post out, which I'm sure loads of people do.
Yep.
But yeah, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Luke. Great to be here, and apologies for the
Thanks
lack
for the
of our
invite.
Santa garb.
Yeah,
But
I
you
am
know,
disappointed.
we're far too reserved here in Ireland to be doing that.
And I'm just bar humbug.
That's my first question. Who's going to assume the role of Grinch? If there was a poll at the
Dave.
moment, I think I know where it would lean. You're wearing green as well, Dave, funnily enough.
Am I just eating because I'm bored?
So we had a quick kind of catch up on this podcast, so it's not completely freestyle, but it's only really two areas to discuss, and that's pretty big topics. So kind of reflecting on 2025, what's happened in the SaaS space, the GTM space, but particularly around customer success and how that's been evolving, or has it been evolving? And then looking at kind of 2026 and really what you guys think and can predict, what's going to happen moving into next year. I know the big topic's AI, and I'm sure we'll cover that off. And we had a couple of questions too. If we get time at the end, we'll run through those questions. But the first thing to say is, obviously, we've got an awesome event coming up with the customer conference in January. So I highly recommend anyone watching this, if you're in the CS space or GTM space, because it's over 2 days now, make sure you visit the customer conference website. I'll put a link below, and Pete may do some discount thing with my name on it, but I'm sure there'll be we'll work something out, or we'll have to cut this bit out. But yeah, check it out. It's a really great event with some great speakers there, and I know both of you have been up on the stage many a times as well. So I guess kicking off, very broad question, but over to you, Dave. How's the year been for you in this wonderful landscape of SaaS?
It's been quite an interesting year. You mentioned the customer conference, and I did a presentation there last January. And I think some of that stuff is starting to come true. I know there's a lot of hype around AI, and I know there's a lot of disbelief around AI. But I do see it starting to take hold. So one of the slides, I looked at the history of AI and a little bit of the future. And I think I predict that 2026 will be the year when AI starts to impact jobs. And I think I might have been wrong there, because I think it is starting. So I think two things are happening. One is I see, if I look at data that's been shared with me, I see a fall off particularly around entry-level jobs. So we need to be thinking about what entry-level jobs are. And I see a shift starting to begin from jobs to agents. And I think that will continue. So, for example, just this morning I read a post on LinkedIn by Jason Lemkin of Sastra. And I'll quote, he said, in 2020, we had so many folks on Team Sastra that we needed a second office. 20 plus 3 designers, sales, content, etc. Today, we have 3 full-time folks and 20 full-time AI agents. Same scale, same revenue. And I was at Sastra AI in London last week, and there are a couple of examples, particularly in the sales arena, where work is being offloaded, jobs are being offloaded to agents.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue.
Interesting. And Peter, would you say that kind of follows what you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, to an extent. So I've probably come at it from a slightly different angle. If we think about SaaS and we think about traditional SaaS, if there is such a thing now, versus the new world, right? I mean, we do know, and we've seen plenty of examples of new companies that have grown up, hit 100 million a year in ARR in absolutely ridiculous time scales. But if you think about the broader picture, we think about when I look back around 2025 and what actually happened, right? And I think it's of no surprise to anyone. First of all, there's 5 main areas. One was an investment reality check. So we're seeing, nearly 80% of most investment going into AI. We're not seeing the investment going into SaaS companies that there used to be. That's then coupled with sort of quiet layoffs, unfortunately, and quiet
Yeah.
cost cutting. So we're seeing that. And we work with about 30 major SaaS companies, global SaaS companies. So we get to see some insights that probably other people don't get to see. I'm obviously not going to divulge names and all that, but you touched on it too. So the third impact or what's happening out there is the CRO takeover. And I think what's interesting about the CRO takeover is that we mustn't think about the traditional CRO, right? I think there's a new flavor of CRO there. And when I talk to various different recruiters, particularly those for PE companies, right? And we all know that PE companies own an awful lot of software companies. So what we're seeing is, I was talking to one headhunter, if you like to use that phrase, and they said they won't even interview people from a traditional VP of CS role, right? They're only looking for people who have got strong commercial experience, strong operational experience around pipeline management. And even if so there is that movement of where we used to see pipeline, that was really only for sales. Pipeline management, that wasn't for renewals. Absolutely not. It's everything. Every dollar is green, right? Every dollar is green. So we're seeing more and more of, to say that people are ditching CS is wrong. I think it's more about there's a recalibration of roles, responsibilities, what the core tasks are, the reward systems, the behaviors that people want to have from a post-sales motion. And SaaS companies, because of the investment reality check, are not in a position to have a land team, an expand team, a CSM team, a professional services team, support team, and all that, right? So they have to consolidate. The fourth area is the AI hype versus reality. And I think, just briefly on that, I think that we all are aware of how AI is helping us on an individual level in terms of productivity.
Yeah.
But what I'm not seeing, and I think other companies are not seeing, is that across an organizational level, right? Because we still have the battle of the LLMs. Every SaaS platform, every software component now has an AI bolt-on. Is it part of it? Was it built with AI in mind?
Yeah.
And so you touched on Intercom, and I'll touch on this later on. We talk about Fin AI, where Intercom have built Fin AI from the ground up, as opposed to putting it into the traditional Intercom platform. And then probably the last one, which I think is when we talk about the future, is the long tail crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that certainly all the companies that we talk to, is that's where they want to have a particular focus amongst lots of other things. So investment reality check, quiet layoffs, CRO takeover, the hype versus reality, and then the long tail crisis. And they are all the things that I saw happening in 2025.
On the hype versus the reality piece, Peter, I do agree, but I think there are two important points there. One is we're at the point of time of evolution of AI, which is still relatively early. So there's a lot of experimentation going off, and I see more and more of those experiments starting to come good. So yes, to date there has been a failure for a lot of projects to generate a significant return. The other thing is, you talked about everybody across go-to-markets trying to apply AI in their sphere. And I think in a way that's part of the problem. Because I think AI's got real contribution can be how it can help us look across the whole customer lifecycle. So I think we've got to move out of this thing that says, well, we're applying AI to marketing, we're applying it to sales, we're applying it to onboarding, we're applying it to value realization. We've got to think about how we can apply it to redesign that life cycle and actually start to say, no, what we need to do is understand the whole life cycle. And by the way, that's not new. Every time a new technology is introduced, it first gets applied to improve that which we currently do. It's productivity, efficiency, speed, quality. The second stage will come when we start to rethink fundamental about how that pipeline, that life cycle, that business works. And I think that's where we're going to get the real breakthroughs. And I start to see a little bit of that, but not much. Not much. It's got to be another.
Just going back to a couple of bits you said, Pete, around particularly this comparison between the almost like legacy VP of CS versus kind of what's expected today. If you were kind of watching this and you're not in customer success, how would you differentiate the two roles? What's expected today versus what was?
I think that again, it's I kind of copped onto this probably late in my career, and I wish I had known it beforehand, which is understanding we used to always talk about shareholder value, right? That's been around for a long, long time. But it was only when I was part of a company that sold to a PE and then stayed on with that company that I really experienced what it's like to be in a PE-owned company. Now, let's be very clear. PEs are good, right? So I'm not going to go on something that PEs are bad. No, they're very, very good. But let's be very clear. They have one intent in mind, and that is to buy a company, improve its worth, its value, and then flip that on, 3, 4, 5 years hence, right? So I think when we look at going back, say, up till about 2.5 to 3 years ago, the world was different, and PEs could get their return within 3 years. And sometimes it might get 3x, 4x, 5x, right? Because there was an awful lot of that investment money that we touched on earlier that was going back into SaaS companies, right? Now we're not seeing that. So the pressure that is now coming from the PE company right down to the exec team, and the exec team right down to the next layer of management, is to focus on EBITDA and top line. So now companies, people in companies are now having to focus on efficiency and improvement in productivity to drive the bottom line up, whilst also driving the top line. But they've never had to do that before. So there's a new set of skills that they have to learn. But they've also got to think, as I said, that every dollar is green. So stop thinking in terms of new versus renewal versus expansion. It's one revenue system. So now we have to talk about how do we build an operating model that supports a singular revenue system, right? And that's where that skill set needs to be. And the only people that typically have that were people who were like, I remember Dan Steinman, the godfather of CS many, many years ago, saying this. He said, you know what, if you think about CS versus sales, does a salesperson get paid every time a deal moves through a stage, or do they get paid on closing the deal? They get paid on closing the deal. But somehow in CS, we were treated differently, yet it was still revenue. We were bonus on NPS scores, bonus on CSATs, and bonus on this and that and so on. But where you bonus on the renewal, and there were people being horrified, oh, you can't pay CSM's commission. Where are those people now?
Yeah.
Right. So those people are very, very quiet that CSM should never be paid commission. Now, I'm not going to say that I always said it, but I did. That CSMs, and certainly in teams that I led, I always paid them commission. Now, I didn't always get the green light to actually do so, but I know it did make a difference, Yeah. So I think it's a shift in the mindset, Luke, and we only have to see with so many people that I know and I've made friends with over the years that are taking longer and longer, to fill those roles. And we're also not seeing, as I'm sure you're seeing too, we're not seeing the VP of CS roles as much as we used to. So we are seeing more of a revenue orientated person that's coming in. Now we can have a huge debate over the titles, but you have to get into what have you actually been asked to do. And it is about the money. And I finish off with just saying, my old adage is that the closer to the money you are, the further from the door you are.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I spoke to a candidate yesterday, actually. They dropped me a line and just asked for kind of an update on what's happening in the market. They've got some senior contacts that are contemplating their kind of next move as well, and wondered whether it was worth making an introduction. And they're VP level candidates. And it's a really difficult conversation because we don't have anything or anywhere to put these people at the moment, because there isn't the volume of opportunity out there, and it's quite hard to then, reverse engineer the recruitment process and market that type of person, because the kind of market value of those individuals has dropped significantly. And that's why you see this disparity between what salaries are being offered, because there's just more choice now for businesses. So they're kind of driving, actually, we want this, but we're prepared to pay this for it because we know we're going to have a lot of competition to win it. And it's quite interesting to hear you say that. And there's almost the stripping out of the role. And like you said, this evolution of job title. And like you said, it doesn't matter. I always, I always sound the horn around, it doesn't matter what you call a role, like what problem are you trying to solve in the organization, and then who has the capability and skill set to come in and actually solve it. That's what you're recruiting for. You can call someone a customer success ninja or Dave a heretic if you want, but ultimately, are they equipped to do the role and perform in it? But I love that quote, the closer you are to revenue, the further you are from the door. Frightening, but so many people over the last couple of years have been beating that drum. I always drop the guy's name. He's just put a book out, Rav Dalawal. Obviously works for an investment firm. I know both of you guys have had some good dealings with him. He's spoken at the customer conference. Dave, we've been on with him previously. And all this stuff's been talked about for years. And it feels like it's just about to catch up, but things are evolving even quicker now, where it's what's next? It's quite interesting. We will talk about that. And the other thing as well you mentioned is the kind of quiet layoffs that are happening, and I fully support that. And we're getting a lot of inbound messages from candidates that have been made redundant, candidates that are nervous. They're going through consultancy periods at the moment, which is obviously a really awful time of year. So I do genuinely feel sorry for anyone going through that at the moment. Why do you think it's kind of going under the radar? Do you think it's like a PR piece for companies? They don't want to show they've got it wrong, or?
There's an element of that, and then depending on the jurisdiction, there's also regulatory matters in hand in terms of the numbers of people. And I don't know if it's down to, again, a lack of experience with some people in terms of how quick they want to make adjustments. If you know that you're going to have to lose a high degree of headcount in the coming year, do you do it at the beginning? Do you do it bit by bit so that you don't cause a huge amount of disruption inside the company? But it's also perhaps indicative of how difficult it has now become to forecast, right? So when we think about it, that in the old days, up until about three years ago, we always enjoyed the hockey stick. It would always come in Q3 and Q4, or we're going to build these new features. That's going to mean X amount of new sales coming in, and so on and so on. So I think it was, I can't remember who actually said this, but they articulated much better than I would ever, which is that SaaS companies bought off SaaS companies, right? Typically, right? So you've got this sort of downward spiral. So it's become harder to forecast. Like when I talk to, when we sit down with our customers and we look at, okay, let's go through your roadmap of, your top OKRs for the year, right? And we map them all out. We work with them. We build out the operating model. Okay, here's how we're going to build it out using Gainsight, using Intercom, or whatever sort of ecosystem you have in order to help you achieve all those goals. I go back to many years ago, and you had OKRs that were 6 months long, 12 months long. I'm seeing OKRs that are now quarter long, right? And then you have a shift, right? You have a shift in it because, big deals are lost, big customers are lost. Does it change? There's an M&A. The PE company that owns them now wants to get to that event horizon. So in order to get to that event horizon, we know that valuations have now shifted to EBITDA. So therefore, you have to reduce the cost base. And in most SaaS companies, the cost base is human. Now, there's comes back to the whole hype around AI. You've got people saying, "Oh, we're going to, we'll be able to replace certain human roles with AI." But again, I don't think organizations are ready to actually implement that, and we've seen examples of that, right? So, I think it's a combination of it becomes more. It's harder for companies to forecast where their growth is going to come from, and when it doesn't happen, then they have to react very, very quickly. And then the other quiet layoff aspect is just not replacing headcount, right?
Yeah.
So it's not layoffs, but it's just, and then again, lots of companies I talk to, I meet with the VP of CS or the VP of sales or the CRO, whomever is in charge of the post-sales motion, and saying, I don't have the headcount replacement. How am I supposed to hit these targets when I've got fewer people, right? And that's when they have to turn to automation.
Yeah.
And from a PE point of view, that's what they want, right? Because automation is far, far more cost effective than humans are, and it's unfortunate. So whether or not PEs are being unrealistic, I don't know.
I mean, to go back to Peter's point about, and your point about the quiet layoffs, I think there are two things that are driving that. The noisy layoffs, if you think about it from a few years ago, were because of a seismic shift in the focus on profitability. The end of the zero interest rate period and the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, that was like just a big shock. And so everybody thought, we've got to do something because Peter's right, EBITDA did matter, and they weren't there. I think what we're seeing now is there's not quite that same industry-wide shock, but lots of organizations are starting to say to themselves, we can do this better, we can do that better. So rather than large-scale layoffs, which of course hit the press, we're seeing lots and lots of little layoffs. And that they don't hit the press. But I do think that is the beginning of a very substantive change. Now, in the longer term, do I think we'll have fewer people in jobs? No, I don't. Because again, history suggests to us that every new technology generates new, right? The employment levels go up, the productivity goes up. Will they be the same jobs? Absolutely not. They'll be very, very different. And I think part of the mistake that people make is, I start to see a shift from, which I think is part of the CSPs, I see a shift from recognizing that measurable results for customers, customer value, is that red thread right through the GTM piece. So that means you have to rethink who does what. So yeah, I do think that CS will be impacted more than many, unfortunately. But I don't mean that they'll be out of jobs permanently. They just won't be doing the same jobs. And the long tail piece is another. That's the only way you can address long tail profitably is through technology.
So I guess we're naturally moving into 2026. I'm sure there's some more bits to tackle for this year. But another point I wanted to ask you about, Dave, that Peter mentioned was around incentivizing CS and how maybe legacy because I know there might be a slight change of opinion from things you've said previously, but I've always said, look, if you want to drive the right behavior, then dangle the right carrot. And I think incentivizing CS with revenue, with cash in their pocket for nailing a renewal, growth, upsell, etc., will drive that behavior. I know the counter argument for that has sometimes been it might drive the wrong behavior because they're too focused on forcing something through. I think that came a lot of the time, in my personal opinion, from not incapable but less qualified revenue aligned CS professionals that were scared of that conversation, that didn't want to have a number over their head and hid behind the customer element to it too heavily. But what do you think about the kind of commission structures and should CS be paid comp? Should it be done based on renewal? How do you see it?
You've probably asked the wrong person in that respect, because
or the right person. This could be a great clip.
My views on comp are quite left field. In fact, only this morning I responded to a post on LinkedIn from someone who said, basically there was a report that said we need to be paying CS people in the way that we pay salespeople. And do I think comps? Absolutely, comp matters. but I go back to this same thing. It's organizations succeed or don't succeed because of everything they do, not just because of what one team or group or two teams do. So my view of comp is, yes, absolutely, comp people, but why are we not comping the people that build the product? Because salespeople and CS people can't renew if they don't have a product to work with. Why don't we comp people that collect the money? Because you can't pay people comp if you've not collected money in the first place. So I think this focus on it's only revenue, they're the only people that matter. Do they matter? They absolutely do matter, and they should be comped. But we shouldn't do that at the exclusion of everybody else. I think this post said how you comp people effectively illustrates what your values are.
Oh, good. It wasn't my
Well,
post. That's good.
If you only comp people that close the deal, your values are money is the only thing that matters. Sorry, closing a deal is the only thing that matters. You can't close a deal unless you've got all the other pieces in place.
I guess.
So I think we've got to take a much broader view as to say, what does comp look like? And my own view, there's two things. One is the work, the psychology between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation is one piece. But the other piece is you've got to be fair to the whole organization.
Is it not more measurable though, in sales, in marketing, in CS? Like when you're tying it to a revenue number, if you've got a 100K target for the quarter and you hit 150K, it's far more measurable than an agile development team that have just delivered a sprint on a product. And typically as well, Dave, they're comped higher on a basic level because of the skill set they've developed. So a software developer might earn 100K per annum on their basic. A CSM might get 60K. And a lot of their comp is made up of delivering, I guess, that overperformance in their role to earn that commission. So it's a difficult. I understand the premise of what you're saying, but I don't necessarily fully agree with it.
No, a lot of people don't. So two things. One is it's difficult to measure in other areas.
Yeah.
Guess what? People say exactly the same thing about customer value. We can't measure it. Well, I don't buy that. What you mean is you've not tried hard enough to get to the measures that really matter. And that's part of the reason that people still today don't, most CS people, most CS teams, most organizations do not reliably measure the value that their customers achieve. In my view, if you don't do that, you cannot claim to be customer focused. You cannot claim to be focused on customer success. It's a contradiction in terms.
So would you say?
So I apply that same argument. And the other thing is that
So
I once had this argument with one of my salespeople at the company that I had, and he said we should get more commission. So I said that's fine. I'll pay you 100% base and 200% commission on anything you do. By the way, you've got to build the product. You collect the money. You do the onboarding. You do the renewal, and you can have it all.
Be a risky conversation with the likes of Lovable now, because when you say you build the product,
well, exactly.
if they're good enough at prompts, you might be out of pocket. Okay, so just going back to the customer value piece, just to understand it. So when you say a lot of organisations perhaps like struggle to articulate that customer value, are we saying, like for example, let's use a MarTech proposition, which primary purpose is to provide leads to a sales or marketing team? Would you say a better aligned organization would be able to track what the ROI would look like from a product perspective? So how many leads they're generating, what's converting to sale? Would you say a lot of teams don't bake that into value realization when they're running things like QBRs to kind of talk through, it's not just usage, it's not just adoption, it's actually this is the money and the revenue you're generating from using our product? Or if it's a health tech product, this is the reduction in absence in your organization, which actually we can equate that to a monetary value because you're getting X, Y efficiency. Is that kind of, am I on the right track there?
I think there are three pieces to this, Luke. I think the first thing is we get focused on a single number, ROI, or something of that type. Is that important? It absolutely is important. You need to be able to understand what that overall business impact measure is. But, the number of people that are interested in that overall business impact measure in an organization that use your product is probably relatively small. It's the decision makers, it's the people, that are signing the checks. A lot of people really want to know is this going to make my work easier? Am I going to perform better? Is it going to help me get promotion? So I think you've got to look at two different levels. The business impact measure, absolutely, but also the performance metrics of the key roles that you are selling to and serving. And I think that opens up a route to actually starting to unpack what customer value is, and it's easier to do that. Now, we both work with a guy in the States called Greg Danes, and he does a lot of work on churn. And a lot of the day he suggests is that for any given product and use case, there are probably only a handful of measures that matter. So it's not impossible. The second thing is, the big mistake that most organizations make is marketing's got a view of customer value, sales has got a view of customer value, customer success might have a view of customer value, product's got a view of customer value, and guess what? They're all different. Yeah. They don't. And we talk a lot about alignment, and it's very powerful. But alignment, by definition, has to have a common basis. You can't align around lots and lots of different things. You can only align around something which is common. And I argue, it's what we're doing with the Customer-Led Growth Forum, Peter, me, Greg and Andy, that's the basis of alignment. If you figure out what measurable results matter to key roles in your chosen customers, that's what you market, that's what you sell, that's what your product delivers, that's what services enable. You've got a red thread. You have a basis for alignment.
Who drives that in the organization?
Well, that's got to be
CEO.
The CEO. It does. I mean, I think it's difficult to argue with the principles of what you're talking about, Dave. However, I do think it's slightly more complicated than that, because I think it depends upon the industry you're in. It depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. Depends upon the age of the company. Like, again, I'm referencing companies I've worked in and companies that I work with at the moment, and some are been around. Software companies have been around for maybe 35, 40 years, right? That one of them does billions a year in revenue, still privately owned, and they're doing all the things that you're not saying are wrong, but that could be done differently, but they're still growing, right? Because they have an institutional way of doing things. So when we talk about traditional SaaS companies, we also have to talk about traditional roles and traditional ways of being remunerated. And I agree with Luke's point that if you only have to look at some of the AI companies in the West Coast who are paying AI developers, 100 million a year in salary and all that kind of stuff. So are they concerned at the moment about customer value? Absolutely not. So I think if you were starting a company tomorrow, right, you're probably going to get not so much, you might get to revenue numbers a lot quicker, but you're going to probably not worry about a few things. One is organizational complexity from a people point of view, because I'm probably not looking at hiring 1,000 people, because that's what I traditionally might have needed to get to 100 million or to get to 150 million. And I'm going to need, 300 software developers. So I'm probably going to need maybe 50 now, right? But I'm going to get there an awful lot quicker. But that then means that my pay scales and everything else that I construct around this company is going to be different. But I can also guarantee you that most of it is going to be based around stock options, because again, that company is on one pathway, and that is to exit. Yeah. So I think to some extent it's almost a red herring, right? It's almost a red herring. It's not where the problem is. I was fortunate enough to go to the CXO conference in Utah this year, and it was about 85, 90 C-suite people from multinational software companies. And when I reflect upon what were the main topics of conversation that were going on there, probably if I was to put some kind of number, 20% was around AI. The rest of it was on organizational change, transformation. How do I get to the next stage for my business? How do I get there? how do I keep growing the profitability of the business, because that's where my focus needs to be. And there's the obvious ones: how can I stop churn? How can I do this? And how can I do that? Right? And nobody had any sort of silver bullet from it. But what didn't come up was, oh, we need to change compensation because that's going to change our fortune. It's going to get people to behave and to. So I think we still have to rely on the old tradition of the CEO being followed, because they are leading the organization with a clear purpose, a clear mission, and a clear strategy. So, and again, depending on the age, size, industry that SaaS company or software company works in, they can think in quarters. They can think in 3 years' time. I cannot tell you the last time I heard somebody say, right, we just kicked off our 3-year strategy. Nobody has a 3-year strategy. Right? Toyota may have a 100-year strategy, but they're in a different business, right? But then also culturally, right, as we know, the Japanese can actually think in that way. They have a culture of thinking in the long term. But unfortunately, in the world of Western capitalism, I don't think we have such a luxury. So, but I think that what SaaS companies are beginning to realize is that they, depending on their industry, they do have to transform. But what they're struggling with, to be fair to them, is what do I transform into?
Who do you think's leading the charge at the moment in terms of business transformation? And I think setting a standard for even things like, AI integration.
I think the one that stands out to me, and only because we have a business relationship with them, is Intercom. And I'm a long-term user of Intercom, when it used to be almost like a product platform that you put your tags in and it would tell you who's using what, and you could use Intercom about 10 or 11 years ago to send out all the renewal notices. Like, you wouldn't even think about doing that now, because that's not what it's built for. But if you go back to what Des and Owen did, that they plowed about 130 million of their own cash reserves into recruiting a whole load of data scientists, and they produce Fin AI. So here you have a traditional SaaS company, right, that was focused on ticket resolution. It then said, okay, we've a number of choices. Do we buy? Do we build? So they built, right? They now have Fin AI almost emerging as its own brand, which it does, has its own logo, right? So here's a company that didn't go out for a Series E or F or raise more money. Nope, they put their money where their mouth was. Fin AI is now claiming up to around 68% agentic ticket resolution, right? Which is pretty good. And they're even offering now $1 million to somebody that doesn't achieve the right goals. But we leave that sort of marketing aspect to one side. So what they're now looking to do is, now we have Fin AI. Let's think beyond ticket resolution. Now what's been publicly said, so I'm not saying anything that I shouldn't, is that they've moved from being into being the customer service agent, right? So not support. So these word changes can be quite significant. So it's not support, it's about service, customer service. And they are now looking at SDR Fin, BDR Fin. So how can we automate that? So we don't have to think hard to think about that use case when it comes to post-sales cycles, right? Which would then bring me on to the long tail, right? So, and we know that long tail, there isn't one solution for the long tail at the moment. It's a combination of different AI platforms, different non-AI products all coming together, mashed together to try and tackle that. But Intercom, to me, is a standout company that has managed to make that transformation. Is it a coincidence that they're not PE owned? That they're able to make those longer term decisions that are not necessarily based on an event horizon.
I don't think it is entirely coincidental, Peter, but I do think there's another factor in there, and that's quality of leadership. I think even whether PE owned or not, yes, the pressures are different, but a lot of excuse me, a lot of leaders just don't grasp. They're too focused on just making today work, not thinking about what comes next, not thinking about how we can build a successful joined-up organization. I love quotes, and one of my favorite is, every organization is perfectly designed to achieve the results it does. It's a truism. And it is. And I think, in my times as a CEO, if I learned anything, it's that one of my key roles was as chief organization designer. And to me, that wasn't about lines and boxes. It was about, how do I create that culture? How do I create that desire to keep improving? How do I create something which joins things up rather than create silos? And I don't think we put enough emphasis on that sort of skill set. And I do think there's a lot of that is alongside the product innovation. I think a lot of that's going to make the difference to people that successfully adopt and exploit AI.
It's interesting, the point on building silos, and not necessarily linked, but we're seeing now more companies where they've got a bit more control on hiring. They want people to come back into the office, certainly if they're in that, let's say like Series A or pre-seed stage, 5 to 50 employees. They're getting people in at least once a week in a central location. And the justification is really, we want to build a unified culture in the business. And I do think that is helped in the flesh a lot of the time.
I think face-to-face contact, person-to-person contact does help a lot. But contrast that with 11 Labs. So 11 Labs is an AI native company. They do voice and that sort of thing. They're the people that have just bought Matthew McConaughey's voice.
All right.
Right. It's a great voice.
Their approach is, we will hire the best people wherever they are in the world. And they're founded on record of saying, we'll go to New York to interview people. Because of two things. One is the quality of talent matters hugely. The second is, whilst face-to-face is important, it doesn't have to be every day. It's not the only thing face-to-face that matters. What you have to do is you've got to build, and this to me is where organization comes back to organization, you've got to build the connective tissue. We focus so much on structures and roles and teams, but we don't look at what are the things that help us collaborate? What are the things that align us? What are the things that make sure that we're focused on the same outcomes? The body's made up of two parts. It's a skeleton, and you'd collapse without it. You need a structure. But the thing that really makes the body different is all the connective systems. We don't put enough emphasis on those.
I think, look, there's a whole different topic on the whole in the office, hybrid, fully remote, all that. And I think it entirely depends. Can you have a culture that is 100% remote? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you can. I mean, Wigmore is 100% remote. Do I have a preference? I suppose hybrid would be nice, right? But
because we're old school, I think.
Yeah, but I don't think it. I'm not so sure it greatly matters too much anymore. But again, I think the horrible answer here is it depends. It really depends. Amazon tried to force it. JP Morgan tried to force it. Google tried to force it. It was a huge backlash. Now we've gone from the era of resignation to the era of termination, unfortunately. So maybe people don't have as much agency and choice as they think they
I
used
think that's
to have.
it. I think that's the big thing. What companies have to realize is if you're forcing people back into the office, if it's not something that you contracted from day one, and you're forcing people to come back in, when the market shifts, which inevitably it will, then you're going to have significant churn in your organization. And if you have, again, pockets of people who are particularly unhappy spending time together, it becomes, unfortunately, a little bit negative in the business, and that stuff breeds quite quickly, and then your culture becomes somewhat toxic because actually people don't want to be there. They're peed off commuting into central London. They're wasting 3 hours a day. So like you said, I've seen some incredible businesses that are fully remote. They don't need people to come to the office at all. It goes back to your original point just around great leadership and that leader being able to create that vision. And you know what, if it's an early stage company, I think if everyone's got a bit of skin in the game as well, this goes back to remuneration. If everyone's got like a bit of equity share and they're all trying to build the company together and you're hiring the right characteristics for that, I think you build the right culture from day one anyway, right? You set up your stall.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time for you gents more than anything. How would you summarize? So Dave, over to you firstly. How would you summarize 2025 shortly, concisely? As it's not the most direct question either, so it doesn't help. But how would you summarize 2025 if you were giving like your summary?
I don't know whether I'd describe it as the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end. But I think 25 signals a very significant transition point.
Okay. And what would you say, Pete?
I'd say that 2025 exposed the cracks in the SaaS operating model.
And we've dived between the two anyway, quite organically. But looking ahead for 2026, what should leaders, what should CS professionals be really kind of doubling down on today to kind of start getting ahead of the curve?
Unlearning. Develop the ability to unlearn. Because everyone says learning new stuff and curiosity is important. The problem that holds organizations back is what I've called legacy mindsets. And if we assume all the time that we're going to have the same thing, then sorry, that was my phone. If we assume the world's going to be the same, yeah,
bit of Black Sabbath coming in.
So unlearning and being willing to say what we've done in the past just is not going to work in the future. I think that should lead to more intercoms, more people saying we've got to reinvent what this business is.
Yeah, agreed.
And I'll give you another prediction for 2026. We will see the disappearance of at least 2 CS platform providers.
Who's your money on?
They'll either go out of business or they'll get taken up. And we'll see actually 26 probably not, but I do think Salesforce is at risk.
What?
Okay, I'll come back to that because I'm not so sure I agree with that one.
I would expect nothing less, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be a little bit more sort of tactical. I think that what leaders should be thinking about, and this is, not from some fantastic inception of strategy that I have, but just from talking to peers, talking to customers and so on. I think it goes back to that leaders we got to shift from a world of built around headcount to a world built around orchestration. And we think about that, we go, right, as I said before, every dollar is green. So we got to stop thinking about new versus renewal versus expansion. Your data has got to be absolutely clean. It beats big teams, right? So if you don't have your product data, your customer identity, your personas, all your signals are all messy, you cannot automate. If you cannot automate, you're not going to compete in 2026. End of story. The AI requires a foundation, and it comes back to you need to understand clear customer outcomes, what the results that they're trying to achieve. You need to have a universal data model whereby every single data point can be correlated to each other data point. You got to have defined workflows, and you got to have trustworthy metrics. Without those, AI is just going to create far more noise for you. Then you've also got to rethink the CSM role. The days of relationship only CSMs are gone. They're just finished. They're finished. So you got to talk. You got to have people that can talk pipeline, the veracity, the velocity of your pipeline. They got to talk about risk levers. They got to also talk about commercial strategy, not just NPS and meetings. Now, some people would say, as you often see on LinkedIn, lots of people say, 5 things you should know, 5 things you should stop doing, which is, I don't necessarily agree with that because I don't think you can be that absolute about anything, because every SaaS company has its own differences, and you define your own strategy as per your own business for what you're trying to achieve in that moment in time, right? But I think what we can say is that people will say, right, CSMs need to be more technical. Well, not really, because it depends upon the product, right? And if your CSMs are becoming more technical, does that mean that you're not focusing enough on your product to make it less complex, right? But again, it depends. If you're selling, to DevOps people, then you're probably going to have a technical conversation. But if you're selling an ERP, you're probably not going to have a technical conversation. You're going to have a business outcome based conversation, right? So I think it all depends. The other aspect that does come up a lot, and we talk about the predictions for 2026, right, is the latest buzzword is forward deployed engineers, right? Which is a sort of concept and has been around for quite some time. So I do think there will be more of that. And the reason why I bring it up now is because if you're a CS leader or a post-sales motion leader, should you be thinking about forward deployed engineering? Should you be talking to your VP of product about that? Absolutely, you should, because the whole concept of this, or what it's supposed to do, is that you put your engineering teams in the front line, and you're making those hot fixes. So if you have a very complex product that takes 6, 12, 18 months to implement, and they're still out there, a lot of them, right? How do I make sure I get the customer to that point of value as quickly as possible without putting hot fixes and all things into the main sort of hopper for all the changes that need to be done within product? So I think we are going to see more and more sort of tactical engagement in that way to get the customer to that value point. So it's not just on the CSM, it's not just on the professional services, it's also on the product team.
Aligning around customer value.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, look, guys, we're at 12 o'clock. There's a couple of quick fires if you've got 5 minutes.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, they say quick fire. We talked about, so I had a couple of questions that came through, a couple on AI actually. We covered that off, so hopefully that answers those questions. Next evolution of CS. Here's some of the quicker ones. So and you're not allowed to say your book, Dave. What's the best book for CS if you're just starting out?
Which book are you talking about, Luke?
Customer-led growth. This one here. Oh, you can't see it.
Yeah.
Although, do you know what? I did notice an error here, Dave. So look, so the book's upright, and then it doesn't align.
Oh dear, I'll get that put right.
It should be the other way, but there we
And
go.
I'll write the next one. What book? I would probably suggest Only the Paranoid Survive by Andy Grove.
Only the Paranoid Survive. I read that one. Peter, what's your go-to recommendation?
I'm gonna go old school. I'm gonna go The Iceberg is Melting by Cotter, the management guru. And the reason for that is because it's very, very short. It doesn't take it's more of a parable than a book, but it is the concept of, if you know it, which is that how the young penguin convinces the elder penguins that the iceberg is melting. And I think it's a great parable because it's really, and I remember buying this book for 30 of my CSMs many years ago and told, right, you have to keep your eyes open. You have to be able to convince everyone that there is a problem. So how do you convince them? How do you change? So we spoke about change, so I think that going back to some of those management gurus of the 70s and 80s, right, their stuff is still absolutely golden, and it's what people are now struggling to go back to, which is how to run a company. How to run a company where you don't have an endless pot of money coming in. So look at Mintzberg.
But there's so many gurus now. Just got to click on LinkedIn. There's so many self-professed.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, there's self-acclaimed gurus who couldn't write a sick note. But there are some great minds out there.
There are, and there's a lot, and I think that's why.
Peter Drucker's another one. Great. Peter Drucker once said, Drucker's great. He once said the purpose of a company is to win and keep a customer. And I think he said that back in 1960, 1970. And I think it's still so true today.
I think anything that Dave Kellogg says as well, there was one nugget I took from him many, many years ago when I was running a large professional services team, and I was asked by a CEO that I was, so what do you think the purpose of professional services is inside a company? And I said, well, I tell you what it isn't. Its secondary goal is around margin, utilization, revenue bookings. Its primary goal is to support ARR whilst not losing money. And I did say that wasn't my thinking, it was Dave Kellogg's. And that got me the job. That was one of the things, because the CEO absolutely agreed that it was so important that, I know it's a completely different topic, the role of professional services in the modern day SaaS company. Yeah. But anything by Dave Kellogg, definitely worth reading.
Awesome. And we kind of talked about there's a lot of gurus out there, self-proclaimed, but who would you say are the voices that are worth listening to?
If you want something left field again, probably Dave Elkington, who was the founder of Signals. He also founded Silicon Slopes in Utah. He does quite a lot of high-level strategic thinking around AI and that sort of stuff. So I'd certainly look at him. The other thing I would look at is not an individual, but there's a group out there called Corporate Rebels. And Corporate Rebels they're a group based in Holland, but they started up to try to transform the way that organizations work. So their goal is, how can we create organizations where people are actively engaged, enjoy their work? So they do a lot, based on the work of people like Ricardo Semler, which is another good book, by the way, on self-managed organizations, self-managed teams, holacracy, completely different ways about thinking about how organizations work.
Awesome.
I just throw one other suggestions. 20 VCs, the podcast on Spotify, and the other one to call out is the Operations Room, hosted by Bethany Ayres and Brandon Masinga. Like that stuff is just absolutely golden. Particularly the Operations Room, because taking your head out of the world of AI, taking your head out of the world of SaaS, but think about how a business runs from an operational point of view. Absolutely golden stuff that's in those podcasts.
Yeah, I had Bethany on actually, and she's awesome. Like, such a cool journey as well. A really great career. Okay, guys, we'll finish on a serious one. What's your best Christmas joke? Christmas cracker? I don't care if it's not PC.
Oh gosh. It's my favorite. Okay, this is a total dad joke, but it did win an award at the Edinburgh Comedy Festival, which is, what did the fish say when it slammed into a wall? Damn.
Nice. Okay.
I don't do jokes. I'm Mr. Grump. I'm the Grinch here.
The Grinch doesn't do jokes. Okay.
Yes! Down a size and a half! And this time, I'll keep it all.
Cool. Well, look, there's some awesome stuff in there, gents, and I know we've kind of gone over time-wise, so huge thank you for being the final podcast of 2025. We've got lots lined up in the pipeline, but I strongly suggest giving both Dave and Peter a follow. Obviously, you've got the incredible customer conference coming up, where both of you gents will obviously be. I'll be there as well, and it'd be great to see you there. So yeah, gents, thank you so much for jumping on.
Great stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Have a great
much.
Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, guys.